Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Daily Debate. My name is Ahmed Nader, and tonight we'll be shedding light more on the participation of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in the China-Arab Summit in Saudi Arabia in Riyadh in the past week that took place between the heads of states from China, the Gulf Cooperation Council and several Arab countries, including the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was there discussing a number of files and the scopes of cooperation in terms of the economic cooperation, the political development, the bilateral ties between Egypt and China, between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, Egypt and the Arab world in general. All this and more through the course of the episode of the Daily Debate for tonight. But we'll be firstly speaking more about the top stories for today, which came from the local arena as President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met with the board chairman of the French company Thales, Patrice Caine. The meeting witnessed discussions on the prospects for cooperation with the French company in the field of satellites, electronics, security technology, cybersecurity, and its applications in the civil service sectors. The Egyptian-French cooperation comes with the Arab International Optical Company and the Benha Company for the electronic industries. The President stressed the distinguished course of cooperation between Egypt and France, especially with regard to the French corporate activity in Egypt and its contribution to the development process. President al-Sisi instructed to enhance the human capabilities within the framework of cooperation with the Thales company in terms of the practical and the technical training qualifications to prepare the cadres of engineers in those specialized fields. Another top story comes from the meeting of Foreign Minister Saleh Shukri with the North Macedonian counterpart, as Foreign Minister Saleh Shukri received the North Macedonian counterpart Boyar Osmani, the chairman of the Mediterranean Partners Group of the Security and the European Cooperation Organization. At a press conference following the talks, Shukri said that the ties with North Macedonia is based on the mutual interests. He said that the meeting discussed the cooperation with the OSCE, adding that the new cooperation fields are being explored for the benefit of the two countries. He said the illegal migration was also discussed during the meeting. Shukri said that the cooperation with the OSCE is important for the stability in the region. He also said that China is a regional partner with the important ties with the Arab and the African countries. For his part, the Macedonian foreign minister said that the trade and the economic ties with Cairo were highlighted at the talks. He said Cairo plays a pivotal role in keeping balances before the global challenges. He said the direct dialogue is the way to boost the joint cooperation and face the challenges. Up next, the first report of the Daily Debate for tonight, which comes from the participation of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in the Arab-China Summit in Saudi Arabia and the means of strengthening the bilateral ties between Egypt and China and Egypt and Saudi Arabia in specific and the Arab world in general. All this and more in the upcoming report, so stay tuned.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has called for enhancing the ongoing partnerships between Arab countries and China, saying that the Arab-China summit at the Saudi capital Riyadh on Friday was a new starting point for economic cooperation between the two sides. During the speech at the summit, President al-Sisi hailed Arab-Chinese cooperation in all fields, including the economic, development, political, and cultural aspects, noting that China is the leading trade partner for a large number of Arab countries. The president has called for sparing no effort to enhance and support the ongoing Arab-China partnerships, especially at the Belt and Road Initiative and the Global Development Initiative, given the investment opportunities they offer in various fields. The China-Arab Summit was hosted by Saudi Arabia Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and attended by leaders of representatives of the member states of the Gulf Cooperation Council (GCC), in addition to a host of Arab leaders or their representatives from Sudan, Iraq, Tunisia, Somalia, among others. The summit was held shortly after the conclusion of the first China-GCC Council. Speaking at this summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping said that trade exchange between Arab countries and China over the past decade has totaled $300 billion, while direct joint investments amounted to $27 billion. The Chinese president stressed that 200 projects have been implemented between the two sides as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Meanwhile, President Sisi also hailed China's balanced position towards the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian people's legitimate right to establish their independent state based on the 4th of June 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. He affirmed that the Chinese position in this regard has been highly appreciated and respected by the Arab world. During the summit, President Xi Jinping called for the need to strictly adhere to the two-state solution, affirming China's support for Palestinian bid to obtain full UN membership. President Sisi also renewed calls for Ethiopia to engage in good faith with Egypt and Sudan to reach a legally binding agreement on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam GERD. He said that I renew the call for the brothers in Ethiopia to necessarily engage in good faith with Egypt and Sudan to reach a legally binding agreement that ensures the right of development of the current and future generations and spare them what threatens their stability, security, and integrity.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate, and to be shedding more light on the summit that took place in Saudi Arabia, I'm honored to be having with me over the program for tonight Ambassador Hamdy Saleh, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on the Daily Debate. First of all, the speech of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi says that is a new starting point for the cooperation in terms of the economic relations and the political relations. How do you think this could be translated in the future?
The participation of President Fattah al-Sisi in this conference is really leading into three dimensions.
Yes.
One is really to reach out to China, and Egypt has been a very long friend of China. We recognized China in 1955, and really we kept supporting China whenever they were really in a crisis and very much isolated in 1950s and 1960s.
Yes.
And we led the movement in order to bring China back into the international system, into the Security Council, and so on. The second dimension is really to reach out to the Saudis, since the Crown Prince has been the leading figure in inviting for that conference. And the third dimension is really to meet the other members of the conference, of the summit. Basically, the conferences is a platform where the president can really connect with so many leaders at the same time, instead of really having a more bilateral meetings or bilateral visits.
Yes.
Now, having said that, let me emphasize that this conference in particular is a breakthrough for China. China is now moving from its regional scope. It has been for some time a regional power, trying now to expand into having some connections in the Middle East and beyond. And this is the only area probably in which has already developed that type of relationship with China. They don't have that type of relationship with Latin America or with other parts of the world, particularly even Africa is still moving on. So this is a breakthrough for China. It will be very beneficial for them. The Middle East and the Arab world is a big market for China. It's also a good partner in terms of exporting oil and gas and so on. So this is a very beneficial move from China for the Chinese economy and for the Chinese political system. Consolidating the position of China versus the international system at large. Also, it has some benefits from the Arab side as regarding that China is the main customer for oil and so on. to what extent that will really lead to a breakthrough in terms of cooperation and economic cooperation and so on, that remains to be seen, because, you know, they have signed so many agreements between China and Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, and probably in the future, if they will move on to develop the same type of cooperation with Egypt, that will be beneficial to both sides, particularly to the Chinese. Egypt is the largest economy, the largest markets, and the largest market in terms of members of the number of population, and also its strategic location and its ability to really connect everywhere. Now, let me add to this that in this particular point, most of the people thought that this conference will be a changing in the international system. And some of the leaders talked about that, a change of the political international system. The change of the international system does not come with a visit of a president or with a conference.
Yes.
The change of international system comes from changing of the balance of power, of the realities in the situation. So, in a sense, this is really opening a window for some type of participation of China in a more active way in the Middle East politics, trying to take China away from being committed to one party and leaving the other, particularly in view of the fact that China has signed an agreement with Iran for 25 years of importing oil. So in a sense, this is bringing China to a more balanced situation in the Middle East.
You've mentioned a very important point, Your Excellency Ambassador Hamdy Saleh, the balance of powers in the Middle East, or for the Arab world in specific, for China and for the West at the same time. Do you think that the balance is tilting towards China nowadays, because there is continued focus from China over Africa, over the Arab world, more specifically going and implementing the Belt and Road Initiative, the Silk Road Initiative? Do you think that the balance of powers is tilting through China now?
The balance, there is no balance of power between China and the West. The West is here, the United States is here. China is not here, it's just coming.
So it's the beginning.
It is a beginning, and it has no presence. The Americans have a military presence. Most of the armies of the Middle Eastern countries are American equipment, and British and French, European. So to a large extent, we are only starting to see what could happen in the future. But for the time being, the situation has to be taken into consideration, that we have to balance the relationship between moving towards China as a friend, as a partner, which is great, but also we have to keep in touch and to keep an eye on the relationship with the West, particularly with the United States at this particular and this critical time. And I think that was clear in most of the leaders' pronouncement and speeches.
And we're doing that, the balance between the West and China.
Yes, yeah.
On the other hand, you mentioned three directions for this summit: China, Saudi Arabia, and the GCC countries, as well as the other Arab leaders who are attending the summit, including His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Speaking about China, firstly, you've mentioned China as one of the main directions for this summit. How do you see the bilateral ties between Egypt and China nowadays, and how could they be developing over the next couple of years politically?
As I mentioned, this is a long friendship, a commitment from the Egyptian Republic and even the Egyptian Kingdom before, to really reach out to China, even the long time ago.
Yes.
So this is a commitment from both sides. They understand, and we understand, that we are the oldest civilizations worldwide, the Pharaonic and the Chinese and so on.
Yes.
We have also some commitment to really develop an international environment and a regional environment which will have a more balanced type of relationship. So I think there is more interest from both sides to really develop relations. Today I attended a press conference by the ambassador of China. He talked about extensive list of projects which China is trying to do here or did here in Egypt. Of course, that is very much encouraging. I think that will be good, if we develop that type of partnership between Egypt and China in the future, not only inside the country, but projects which we can do all over Africa and all over the Arab world. Egypt has the capabilities to do that as a partner, which is not really most of the Arab countries do not have. We have the human resources, we have the technology, we have the capabilities, and I think we can put together several projects all over the African continent and even beyond with China, since China has these ambitions to be, there, and we are already there.
Yes, one of the ambitions is the Belt and Road Initiative and the Silk Road Initiative. Do you think that Egypt could be a successful partner, as you mentioned, for China in this great developmental project for the future?
Let me start by saying the Belt Road and the Silk Road was actually initiated by Arab traders in the 11th, 12th, 13th centuries.
Yes.
This is a concept that the Arab world did. The Arab traders really reached to China, brought the silk to Europe, and they established commercial centers there. There's so many books which were really actually written by Americans and Europeans about that.
Yes.
This is not an old idea. This is an Arab concept. And to revive that, of course, needs a partnership between this part of the world, which is very strategically located, and China. If they wanted to expand their own exports and so on to really connect more, it's a good idea. We will be happy, I think, that to move with them on that direction, taking into consideration that will be beneficial to both sides. So we have to look into all dimensions of this project and to see what could be done. Of course, in the speeches given by the leaders over there, they all welcome this type of initiative by China. It's a good idea. But also we have to see to what extent we can really implement these things without getting into trouble with the other parties. So we could, because in the final analysis, the world is really well connected.
Yes.
They used to say it's a global village at this particular point, and you have to keep good relations with most of the parties.
How can Egypt be benefiting from those projects, specifically that Egypt could be just a transit point between China and Europe or Africa?
What do you mean could be? Egypt is strategically located. They cannot go anywhere else. That Egypt is the road.
They have to go through us.
Egypt is the road. Where else? If you can come from China and go by sea, you have to go to the Suez Canal, and that is really very important. And also, if you have to come somewhere, you can go via Turkey. That's true, but that's a little bit more expensive. So, in a sense, the Arab world is very instrumental in this. It's very critical in this idea of connecting. But the problem is that this is more, let me say, this is an ambitious project. But it tells that we need to connect more. China needs to connect more with the Arab world and with Europe. So it's not only to wait to reach to the Europe. It's actually to reach the Arab world itself. This is a very large market. It's a rising economy. And welcome, they can bring their own goods and technology if they have here.
One of the thorny issues that could have been discussed and was discussed was the climate change, as China is a big contributor to the carbon dioxide emissions, as we did see in the COP27, which was held here in Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh in the past month, that China has to be bearing responsibility for the future of the globe, as well as the West, the United States and Europe. Do you think that China could be leading a role in those solutions, political solutions, for the benefit of the planet?
From the speeches given by the President of China and for what I heard from the ambassador today, and from the ideas which they presented somewhere, both in the climate, in COP27, the climate change conference, and in that conference in Riyadh, you feel that they would like to come forward to really to be effective in that. However, most of the other countries are complaining that China is really a very large producer of these type of things which are really polluting
Yes.
the climate. It takes time, and I think China will move on, because the entire world is moving on, and there is more consciousness about this, and I think that will be in the near future will be more forthcoming.
Following the conflict between Russia and Ukraine for the past 10 months, we have seen deteriorating situations in terms of food security for the whole planet, in terms of the energy supplies as well for the whole planet, and more specifically for Europe after the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. How do you see the role of China politically for those conflicts?
Let me pinpoint to the fact that in the same day where the conference in Riyadh was taking place, there was a conference for the Eurasian, coalition, and President Putin was addressing that in Kazakhstan,
Yes.
in Minsk. And that means that, there is now an effort to build, Asian coalition, one built by Russia and one built by China, in order to really create for them a space to move on. The problem of Ukraine is really a major problem. It has affected so many people, and not only Ukraine now it's a battlefield and in a very bad shape, but as you said, the problem of the security of food security and the problem of the oil and gas security and so on in Europe and everywhere, it's a major problem. China has been taking a very neutral, track in this. It is, did not really move that much into the conflict. There was a call from the Europeans and from even the Americans to try to be a middle entity between the Russians and the Ukraine and try to resolve the issue. Hopefully that can happen, because all of us are, eager to really conclude that type of conflict and to move on. The food security is a major problem, and of course that affects not only the Arab world, it affects also China. China is an importer of several food items, and of course a major importer of the oil and the gas. They are importing now from Russia because they have borders and they can really move on.
Yes.
And also India is a major importer of the oil and gas from Russia. But this crisis should not really continue. This is a worldwide crisis and really affecting everybody, including me and you.
Yes.
So with the prices going up, things are really going very difficult. People in the street here, in the street in London, in the street in Paris, they are all complaining. This crisis should not have happened. I mean, that's a real bad situation for humanity to come into a war, a real war, where people be killed in the 22nd century. It's unbelievable, yani. So, 21st century, I'm sorry. So we are talking about a tough time, and I think we should really move beyond that.
Do you see an end in sight for the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, especially through negotiations following the recent developments?
Unfortunately not. I mean, most of the commentators saying that there is not yet any opening and not yet any concrete, indications that, neither the Russians, Putin, and the cabinet over there are willing to move beyond what they wanted, what they made as their own requirement for a peace settlement. And of course the Ukrainians are talking about the same thing, and they are like what people used to play a game, I say it's a zero-sum game. The political scientists love this statement, saying zero-sum game, multi-sum game, typical professional type of statement. Yes. So, but it is a zero-sum game, because once the Ukrainians are saying we need all the Ukrainian land, for us, and the Russians say no, all the four republics are really our Russians, and so on. So we are really in front of a very tough situation. Unless there will be a real great diplomatic, I don't know what to say, the diplomatic model to try to move into bilateral relations between Ukraine and Russia. And also basically the conflict is not really Russia versus Ukraine, it's Russia versus the West. Yes. And that is amazing, the type of money and effort which is given by the Europeans and Americans into this, and also the type of money and efforts and the people who are really dying. It's really a tragic thing.
Before the China-Arab summit, there were a couple of summits before that in Saudi Arabia. One of them was the China-GCC summit and the China-Saudi Arabia summit. For the China-GCC summit, what do you think were the main results of such a summit? Was it all about the economy, about the oil to be imported to China, the biggest importer of oil in the world?
No, I mean, this is a conference which, the GCC is really moving into becoming an active player in the international arena, and I think that's a very good thing for them. And the fact that they have a special conference on that, which will be more specific on the needs between the two sides, the 5 countries or 6 countries in the Gulf Cooperation Council, and China. I think that is a very useful thing. I don't know exactly what have been produced out of that conference, so I cannot comment on that, but I believe it will be very useful to move on.
On the other hand, the China-Saudi Arabia summit, there's a new vision, as you mentioned, Your Excellency, during the first talks about Prince or Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. There's a new vision, there's a new strategy for Saudi Arabia. How do you think things are adding up economically, politically, and even through the region? There seems to be a new image for Saudi Arabia nowadays.
Saudi Arabia is building its own image as really a moving force. And the Crown Prince is moving on to try to modernize the country, which is a great thing. We appreciate that very much. We hope that in his efforts, he will be able to really do these two things, modernize the country, at the same time balance his relationship with the international forces. And that is his challenge, how to really make a balanced relationship with all the forces in there. The new vision, this is what was needed in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, for a long time, they had money, but they did not have a very long-term type of economic vision. And I think it's about time that the Crown Prince will be coming with that. And I talked in the past several times about the Saudi Arabia plan for 2030, yes, which is a great thing. The idea is that you have the money. You have, the connections. Probably you have some of the human resources, but you have to take your time in order to build all these things. There is some image is coming in the West that, this is too ambitious, it's moving too fast. But let us say, I think what he's doing is good, and hopefully that will be very successful.
Do you believe it's too fast?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not a very, close observer of what's happening, but there is some comments that they are moving too fast. There's some comments saying no. I mean, so it depends.
We will be seeing the results, as we will be seeing the upcoming report for the daily debate, as President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi had several discussions with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman on the investments, the potential investments into the country, and the political developments between Egypt and Saudi Arabia for the future. All this and more in the upcoming report. So stay tuned.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi discussed launching more joint projects with Saudi Arabia in light of the promising investments between the two countries during his meeting with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Riyadh. On the sidelines of the China-Arab summit that was held in the Saudi capital, President al-Sisi discussed with the Saudi Crown Prince how to promote economic and investment integration between Cairo and Riyadh. President al-Sisi stressed the importance of continuing periodic and intensive consultation and coordination with Saudi Arabia on issues of mutual concern at the highest level in a way that reflects the two countries' commitment to strengthening their deeply rooted strategic ties and enhancing Arab and Islamic unity in the face of enormous challenges. President al-Sisi also hailed the bilateral talks, which come at a time with many successive regional and international developments. For his part, the Saudi Crown Prince lauded the distinguished relations that bind the two brotherly countries. He asserted Saudi Arabia's keenness to support bilateral cooperation frameworks with Egypt at various levels. Egypt and Saudi Arabia have shared distinctive bilateral relations in various political, economic, security, and investment fields and have maintained continuous coordination on regional issues of mutual concern. In June, Egypt and Saudi Arabia signed 14 investment agreements worth $7.7 billion. The volume of trade exchange between the two countries reached about 54 billion Saudi riyals or $14.4 billion in 2021, the highest in history, achieving a growth of 87% compared to 2020. Moreover, the volume of Saudi exports to the Egyptian market reached 38.6 billion Saudi riyals or $10.8 billion, and Egyptian imports to the Saudi market reached 15.7 billion Saudi riyals or $4.18 billion, a record growth of 60%. The volume of Saudi investments in Egypt amounts to more than $32 billion through more than 6,800 Saudi companies.
You're still watching the Daily Debate, and I'm honored to be having with me over the program for tonight Ambassador Hamdy Saleh, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you very much once again for being with us. The historic relations between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, how do you think they have developed in the past 7 or 8 years under the tenure of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, more specifically in terms of drawing more investments, as we did see in the report, $7.7 billion worth of investments from Saudi Arabia into Egypt, and on the political level as well?
Let me start with the political landscape first. You know, immediately after what you call the Arab Spring, the Arab world was really in a very bad shape. It was only the 4 countries who are stable and well established, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and Bahrain, and so on, that we were able to, build what you call the stability group. This is a group who really created a certain stability in the region and started to move on to really create, to resolve the issues which are, surrounding us. The Arab world is in a very bad shape. You have war in Yemen, you have conflicts in Syria, you have conflict in Iraq, you have conflict in Libya, you have conflict in Somalia and Sudan. So it was only that coalition of stable countries that can really move on. And the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Egypt was very critical in that, particularly that the feeling Saudi Arabia needed stability. They needed that type of thing because they are facing the issue in Yemen. They are facing the threat from Iran. There is a lot of threats, coming to Saudi Arabia. So on the political level, it was very important to build that type of bonds or rebuild it again, because basically as an Arab countries we were really connected and moving ahead before the Arab Spring. Now we are building it again. So that's on the political landscape. This coalition of the stable countries is very important in the political scene, regionally and internationally, because really the international system at large is really hurting because of what's happening in the region. The illegal immigration, the terrorism, the problems coming from here, the oil problems, and so on. So if you establish a stable regional system led by Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Bahrain and so on, in cooperation with the other Gulf states, I think that would be very helpful to the region and to the world system at large. Now, taking into, talking about the economic dimension, of course, that was very useful for Egypt to have Saudi investment and Saudi money coming in. But the horizon in front of the cooperation between the 2 countries is still wide, very wide, and could be done to the benefit of both sides. It really depends to what extent we can really develop ideas and what you call bankable projects, which can really benefit the Saudis and benefit the Egyptians and can benefit the other regional parties. So the statistics which were mentioned in the report is good, but I think the horizon is really in front of us to really move beyond that.
In the first part of the episode, you've mentioned that the West is already here, politically, militarily, on the economic level, in every other level. On the other hand, China is only beginning to take the first steps towards approaching the Arab world and Africa. How do you see a possible response? Do you think there's a possible response from the West to those measures, to those steps?
There was a possible response. There was already a response. The Americans actually made a decision during the Trump administration, and then later in the beginning of the Democratic administration, and even during the Obama administration, to move to the Far East and really to try to leave the responsibilities in the region. They were really moving there during the Obama, during the Trump, and then the beginning of this administration. As a result of that, there was a strategic vacuum here, because if you are moving that too quick, either in Iraq or in Syria, or what happened in Afghanistan, you really leave behind you a real fiasco. So they felt that later on, they felt that this created problems for them. So the Americans and the Europeans are coming back, particularly the Americans, They are coming back to establish their own presence. They need, the Americans have so many ways to establish themselves. They have all the relations with the region, educational system, cultural, political, and so on. And the kind of relationship has been there for a long time. So all what they need to do is to do it in a good intention, and to try to help, to try to support the economic development of these countries here, and to try to support the security of the region, and to take a very clear policy towards what's happening in the region, which is threatening the region. Iran, the Houthi, and the problem in Syria. They have to be clear. Libya.
Yes.
A major problem facing the Americans and Europeans is that they are not clear about these things. They have no policy. It's unbelievable, and they need to have a policy. Libya, it's a clear-cut situation. What is this? They are leaving the situation for conflicting forces, and everybody is trying to push his own ally and so on, and Libya is really the victim. Yes. The same thing seems to be in Syria. I mean, now they are talking with Turkey, please don't invade, because we can. That's ridiculous. We have to have a political system which is stable, secure for every country. So that's one point about, the West is coming. They have to come with a clear policy, and have to come with a reasonable policy, with a policy which establish stability and establish security for everybody. On the other hand, China can play a constructive role. They already talked about their position with regard to Palestine. They supported the two-state solution. That's exactly what the Americans have been saying. The problem, how do we achieve that? And both countries have to really let us know how we can achieve that.
Yes.
So, but the Americans have been, all the administration, even the Republican Democrats, they say, until even Blinken, just the Foreign Secretary of State, just mentioned that we are supporting the two-state solution. And then the situation on the field is changing to the opposite. Now there was a cabinet, now Netanyahu is coming, which will be extremist groups and so on, in alliance with the extremist group, and that will have a real difficult life for the Palestinians. We need to develop ideas to really get that, moving, and to have a more realistic, solution for the Palestinian issue.
During the Arab-China summit, President Sisi spoke about the Arab water security file as a main priority for the Arab world, and more specifically the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the construction of it, and the consent that they need, Ethiopia needs from Egypt and Sudan to be continuing with filling the reservoir. How do you see the importance of raising such a point at this level?
I really admired the fact that he stated that it's not raising the issue. This is an issue, this is the issue. And you cannot really overlook it. Yes. For all the forces, the region, or for all the international forces, they cannot really overlook the fact that the water supply is a major thing in the region, and the fact that there is some countries who are trying to make problems in the water supply. That's ridiculous. Yes. So he raised the issue in a very friendly way, and I think that it was very good gesture from him. I also admire the gesture which was made by President Fattah al-Sisi in the climate change at the beginning. Yes. When he said we would like to have an initiative to end the conflict in the Ukraine. So he is really committed and concerned about the international peace at large, the international security at large. That's what Egypt's position is. It has been there that way all the way from the time of the royal regime until now. Egypt's strategic location, because it's strategically located, so it's really already committed to the security of the region and to making a contribution to the international system at large.
Do you think that China having good intentions, as you mentioned, in terms of the Palestinian state, in terms of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, do you think that those good intentions could be translated with the power of China economically and financially and politically to be pressuring towards Palestine to be resolved, the cause for Ethiopia to be resolving the same issue?
Yeah, and we hope that. We hope that China will be on the right side, and that's what President Xi Jinping has been talking about. That they are on the right side, and I believe them, and I believe China will take the right side. The problem is that in the international system at large, people are talking about things but not moving to achieve it, and we need really to get things more serious and to get things implemented.
President Sisi also met with the Tunisian counterpart, Qais Said, during the summit. How do you see the Egyptian-Tunisian bilateral ties nowadays?
Look, Egyptian relations with the Maghreb countries, Tunis, Tunisia, and Algeria and Morocco is moving quite well. Particularly Tunis, after the revolution there, and the change and so on, was really They were looking into the Egyptian example, and there was special relationship. We are very, I think we are very, as Egyptians, are very much interested to get, Tunis to where they want to be, stable and prosperous and so on. I'm not close to what the content of the discussion, but I think that basically was in terms of expanding cooperation, in terms of security, in terms of economic, and in terms of political.
Yes, and finally, before wrapping up, the COP27 was held here in Egypt in the past month. How do you see the importance of holding such a global summit here in the country over 2 or 3 weeks in Sharm el-Sheikh? What does this say about the country, the organization of the summit itself?
Let me say that, the choice of Egypt to be the center for that, the headquarter for that conference by the United Nations was very logical, because Egypt is an African country, one of the major African countries, very strategically located, a stable country, very much committed into the international system, into establishing stability, and also into the climate change to try to reduce, all this pollution and so on. So it was a very logical thing. However, it was the support of the United States and support of other European countries that got us there. And because they appreciated the role of Egypt, they appreciated the location of Egypt and the leadership. Now, the organization was terrific. We proved to a very large extent that, this country is able to put together things in a very good way. The point is, we are the president of that conference for 1 year. And we have to achieve, we have to move on. And that's what the president has been talking about.
Yes, Ambassador Hamdy Saleh, the former Assistant Foreign Minister, thank you very much for being with us tonight on the Daily Debate.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And this brings us to the end of the Daily Debate for tonight. I will be leaving you, however, with the presidential activities of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in the past week. So stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.